In this video, I'm going to look at some of the ideas covered in a chapter called The Word of God in my book, Think Again. That's what the cover looks like for both the paperback and the ebook. It is also available as an audiobook. In the chapter, I examine 10 common claims from Christian apologetics. In this video, we're going to look at a few of those. Maybe you've heard this from C.S. Lewis, who likes to use alliteration, probably more than logic, but he wrote that if Jesus claimed he was God when he was not, that would make him a liar. If he was not God but thought he was, that would make him a lunatic. Therefore, the only other choice is that Jesus is Lord. Or, to keep with the alliterative feel, legendary. Why would you think that the words that we have in the Gospels are exactly what Jesus said? The earliest Gospel was written around 40 years after the crucifixion. It was written in Greek by people who didn't know Jesus or the 12. I don't even know within the Gospels if you could say Jesus claimed to be God. He seemed to always separate himself from his Father in heaven, in my Father's house. There are many mansions. That doesn't make any sense. Isn't a mansion also a house? But anyway, to assume that we have the exact words of Jesus or any of the words of Jesus, it's a flimsy premise and it's a terrible conclusion. Historical figure. Something happened probably at the temple during the Passover, just like pretty much any other day. Rome is not playing around. If it looks like there's some type of a disturbance and insurrection, we can execute everybody involved or we can execute the leader. But then obviously Jesus was shocked. My God, why have you forsaken me? At least that's what it says in the first two Gospels. But then when the Gospels are written, they're telling stories of Jesus, giving you the flavor of this character, the importance of the message. But to think that it's history or journalism separated by decades, it's a strange approach. In the case for Christ, you can see what the author's up to. Let's take the weaknesses of my view and either distract from them or somehow turn them into a strength. So he must have sensed that the four gospels don't line up, but for some reason he says they're just minor inconsistencies. And that actually bolsters the credibility because in court, if four witnesses tell the story that's too similar, it's obviously rehearsed. Okay, but the four gospels that we're talking about, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, don't have minor inconsistencies. Only two of them have birth narratives. Mark and John don't do that. Mark gets started right before the baptism. John has a whole different approach. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So Matthew and Luke do have birth narratives, but they're completely different. As Bart Ehrman would do with his students, read Matthew and take notes as to what happens. Read Luke's account, take notes. In one of them, they're fleeing because Herod is going to kill the firstborn. In another one, they have to travel to register for a census. You can see that the authors just want to make it clear that Joseph is from the house of David, which I don't know why that matters since it's a virgin birth, but you know, who knows? The final words on the cross are not minor inconsistencies. Between Mark and then Matthew, it's the same. My God, why have you forsaken me? Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, something like that in Aramaic. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is much more calm. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, into your hands I commit or commend my spirit. He's in control. And in John, it is finished. He breathed his last breath and gave up the spirit. The empty tomb scenes are separated by major inconsistencies. In Mark, there's a mysterious young man seated in the tomb, and he talks to the women. He tells them to go tell the apostles, I believe, or the disciples. And they just flee. It used to end with the earlier versions end with just chapter 8, where the women are afraid and run away. In Matthew, after already showing us an earthquake and people getting out of their graves and walking around and the temple curtain ripping from top to bottom, again, when they go to the tomb, there's an angel in there and another earthquake. But Luke and John have completely different scenes, and for the appearance, the two are walking on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus appears, but they don't recognize him. You find that in literature at about that time, ancient literature, and excuse me, to 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 imply that I just have a brief bullet point list to pretend that that's a minor inconsistency. Only two of them have birth narratives, and they're completely different. The words on the cross are different. The tone of the crucifixion, whether there's a trial, how he interacts with Pilate, it's all different. If Matthew thought Mark's gospel were complete, why would he have written his? Same with Luke and John. They have their own theologies and they have their own stories. A lot of them are in common, but these are not minor inconsistencies. I don't know that the case for Christ said they were eyewitness accounts, but a lot of apologists that I hear today do. Pretty sure that the case for Christ said Mark is writing what Peter told him. Luke was close to Paul. Okay, well, right there, if Mark got it from Peter, Mark's not the eyewitness. And Paul tells us he's not an eyewitness. So if Luke got it from Paul, wow, we're into hearsay. And I see no reason to think Matthew or John wrote Matthew or John. The Gospels traveled anonymously for many decades, maybe centuries before the names were attached. Right? Early church leaders had to take a lot of liberties, just like the writers of the Gospels. But if you just read Luke, the introduction says, since many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things fully attested among us, as delivered to us by the original eyewitnesses who became stewards of the word, it seemed good to me also, having meticulously traced everything again from the top, to write it down in sequence for you, O most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the reliability of things you have been told. Luke separates himself from the original eyewitnesses. And notice how Theophilus typically has some other meaning. Theo, God, Philus, lover, lover of God, loved by God. What else do we really need to say to an apologist saying that these are eyewitness accounts? They're not. The earliest gospel could have been written in the year 70 or later. But John, the consensus is that it's late first century. Would it be shocking if we found out John started writing it in, the year 140? I don't think too many scholars would be shocked. Dating these things is very tough. But eyewitnesses, nah. And how about the theology? This is some striking contrast here between Paul and James. These are lines from two different epistles written by Paul. Of course, Paul wrote most of the New Testament. If you think of a kid memorizing the books of the Bible, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, First Thessalonians, Second Thessalonians, all penned by Paul, or at least somebody using the name of Paul. But two very common theological statements come from Galatians and Ephesians. For by grace are ye saved through faith, not by works. A lot of people take that as, oh, once you're born again, you're good to go. Although, well, faith, that needs to be restored every week and maybe during the midweek on Wednesday. But certainly I don't have to do anything except be born again and stay faithful. Although, in another epistle, I think this clarifies what he meant by works, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. So the faith is common to both of them, and that's where evangelical Christians put their focus, obviously. Like Billy Graham doing a revival in a sports stadium, trying to bring people to Christ. All the evangelical churches I visited have an altar call every Sunday, or typically. But It could be that when he said not by works, he meant not by works of the law. Don't worry about the rituals and the customs. Just understand that you're saved by the grace of God and by your faith in Jesus Christ. And so we're going to have praise services and altar calls every week. That's that right there supports the evangelical approach perfectly. This, however, says, Ye see then how that by works a man is justified and not by faith only. What? Yeah, that's a contrast. In fact, knock it off. Just trying to draw a line. Okay. On top, we have justification for the evangelical approach. Unfortunately, the top one could be twisted to support MAGA. Like my representative in District 5 here in Colorado now, I still remember that video that I saw on social media where she went to the musical with her date, and they were really handsy. And she got kicked out for vaping and singing too loudly. And on the way out, she just proudly flipped the bird at these people. Wow, that is not the way that most people would associate a Christian faith or Christian behavior. But man, if I was saved, maybe I don't know her particular situation, but a lot of these folks, I went to Jesus camp and I was saved at age 7. I go to church every week. I'm good. I don't have to do anything. According to James, it's not just your faith, but it's by works. And there, I think he's talking about being good to people, the way Jesus often preached. If they ask you for something, give them more than they ask. If they ask you to go a mile, go another mile. You know, if you care for the people in need, then you're doing it in my name. So the line from James supports the mainline approach. We don't have altar calls. We don't talk about people being saved. We focus more on how people are right now and how they're going to be in their daily life next week. If you want to see a really good explanation of the mainline approach, because I only experienced that through 8th grade confirmation. And then I went off on the evangelical approach for a few years, but it didn't last. But C.J. Cornthwaite, excellent YouTuber, he is a Bible scholar. He does a lot of great textual breakdowns, but he also explains his journey, which started out evangelical. He went through deconstruction, but he didn't become an unbeliever. He became a mainline believer. And of course, many of the folks who go to non denominational charismatic churches would just say, well, you're not really a Christian then. The old no true Scotsman fallacy. But that's also a lot of being an evangelical, the certainty that the mainline approach is absolutely wrong. It's not just that they're angry at atheists and agnostics. It's Catholics, no way. Mormon, not a chance, even though Mormon is evangelical. But separating into these groups and feeling that they have the only valid approach leads to a lot of division, obviously. All right, so let's look at these again. I like to review. Liar, lunatic, Lord. Well, we don't know that Jesus did claim he was God. And the words that are attributed to him in the Gospels is part of the gospel narrative. It's not journalism, it's not history. The inconsistencies among the 4 Gospels, it's actually kind of a weird approach. Each one is made to stand alone. You should read Matthew only as Matthew. But if you do read each one and take notes, you'll find major inconsistencies. Only 2 have birth narratives, and those birth narratives couldn't be more different. The final words on the cross are different. The tone of the crucifixion, the message of it, and the empty tomb scenes or the appearance scenes, they're all different. The idea that these are eyewitnesses, it's contradicted by Luke. Those names were attached years later by early church fathers. And again, quite different theology. Focus on faith. Don't worry about your behavior. Hey, you got to do good works. It's not just faith. Wow. Kind of interesting. As I said, I handle 10 common claims in that chapter of the Word of God. And the book Think Again covers a lot of other topics: Watergate, Civil War, Revolutionary War. I think the paperback is $12.99. The ebook is less than that. Certainly not an expensive book. As far as the YouTube channel, if you could like and subscribe, I would appreciate it. Thank you.